more than just steel and gears. It pulls you in and doesn't let go.
All right, hello. Welcome back to the carousel. I know it's been a while. I have been delinquent in doing episodes because I've just been so busy. So yeah, I am here today with a familiar name, PCM Christ. Great author, great writer, cool guy. Welcome back to the show, PCM.
Thanks for having me, man.
Of course. All right. So you hit me up and wanted to talk about this topic of subversion. So why don't you go ahead and just tee this up and we'll get right into it.
Yeah, for sure, man. Well, it was sort of based on my response to another carousel episode with Jesse Larkin and King Cringe. That was not focused on subversion, though their podcast is Subverting the Subverters, which started an interesting conversation. But really, it was sort of the gist of it seemed to be trying to recognize where, if anywhere, right-wing art can go. What are its praxis, and so subversion in general is something that I've been interested in. I like most of my major work. And we can talk about it throughout if it becomes relevant, but most of my major pieces have been subversive in some way, like even from the beginning. And so I thought, especially, I had mentioned this, like even working in advertising at this point, I sort of consider everything. It's all battle of names at this point. And I thought, even being in advertising, it might be an interesting conversation to have with you. Plus, it sort of lined up with the episode that you'd done with them.
Totally. All right, so let's dig right into it. What's your take on subversion in the right wing art sphere?
Well, let me just spurg out then, if I can. Go for it. Right. So to do so, right, like to really sort of understand like what we're messing with here, is I think you kind of have to understand, like, to pull back and understand certain meta narratives, like to where we're at and just like of the human race, right? And sort of what probably the most ancient one that still leads up to this day, and then we get into the 20th century, right, would be the mono dash, right? And so what happened was all of our narratives, going back to the Byzantine, going back to the more localized, where you can identify the nation states, if you will, and the civilizations that produced them, they were all conceived in isolation, right? And the main thread through the world of how we get to where we are is, as I said, the mono dash, which is what unites the tribes of Judah, what unites the middle kingdom of China, right? What unites the tribes of Islam, what unites the barbarian states, and tribes of Europe, right? What unites the communists, right? What unites National Socialists, right? What it comes down to is, as the world expands, as knowledge of narratives expand, right? Whereas previous perspectives on the world, previous lenses on the world are exposed to other lenses, they will wrestle with those. I mean, you even get this in religious denomination, and these lenses wrestle with each other, and one either sort of goes to war and subjugates the other one as best as it can, usually through physical means, just by wiping out the locale, or it's adopted, or it's completely replaced, right? On a larger scale. As I said, everything that united the civilizations and disparate groups that I mentioned, right? And so this is the meta narrative of history. This is the meta narrative of culture. And what we get when we get to the 20th century, and this is important because it allows for everything that comes in the 20th century that we consider the narratives of the West having been subverted, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we get the Industrial Revolution. We get the whole Nietzsche, God is dead, right? And the way that I'm going to frame that is that when God is dead, what it means is that mankind has become centralized, and that the divine interventions, the divine supplications, the divine will, and we're leaving out, and I'm not an atheist, by the way, but what it does is it's replaced by science, right? And so previously my poor child was dying at age 3 of tuberculosis, and we didn't have medicine. And so then he gets pneumonia, and then his lungs fill, and I pray to God, and he dies a horrible death, and it was God's will. And that's also the nature of the world as it was understood, until we just figured out that science can fix this, right? It's no longer God's will. It is mankind's hand in everything. And then, of course, culminating, as far as God goes, it culminates in the atomic bomb, right? We are now planet destroyers, not planet creators, but we can destroy the shit. That sort of recognition that we can't create a world, but we can destroy it, feeds into the same sort of eugenic considerations of the authoritarian regimes that come up in the early 20th century, right? And so now we're looking at ourselves, we're looking at culture, we're looking at our civilizations as people who are sort of without responsibility, right? It's the same as AI, right? No one feels like there's a responsibility to go anywhere, right? We've actually put forces of nature into play that ironically we perpetuate, but we don't control, right? So we're still subject to nature, even continuing. So then we're at nature. And then here's where the interesting part happens, right? Is because we have the only surviving really, and there are reasons for this beyond, but we get democracy, right? America kind of comes out of World War II, relatively unscathed, capitalistic democracies. But then we get, and this just follow it with me, right? And we'll lead up to today. Is we get what is in the 50s. This is not subversion, right? We have not subverted ourselves on purpose, right? What we have done is we've had revolutions. We also get in the 50s, we get the rebellion against such things. Mm-hmm. But starting really, I think it starts with Freud, because it's a level of self-analysis and awareness that just people did not have. It's a deconstruction of self. And what happens is you'll notice if you do the studies, like where did woke come from? Where did everything that we're dealing with now, right? Postmodernism, where did it all come from? It starts in literature, right? And I mentioned the importance of narratives. We have the structuralists come up in the 60s, right? We have the deconstructionalists. And so what happens is, and this is where the rebellion against modernism, right, which was participation in one's self-created narrative, right? It was autonomous. Postmodernism decides that actually we are nothing without structures, right? And so whether it be politics, whether it be cultural narratives, the thing that matters most, and this applies to the art discussion that y'all started to have, was that now we have narrative control. Now we have something that we can aim towards, and that is fueled by this idea of progressivism, right? Now, as far as the academics in the 60s go, the Black humorists, the deconstructionists, Derrida, all the sort of classics, where this starts as far as theory goes, we get to a point where that is the only thing new. It's the only thing propelling us. And so the leftism, through counterculture, both in academia and in popular culture, starts creating art, and it creates narratives. And once again, just let me emphasize the point. This all started with literature, right? Everything started with the written word. And so then eventually, politically, that's a different topic. But we get to the point, I mean, I'm barely old enough, but you probably remember like up until probably like the 2000s, maybe even past then, is the right was sort of conservative, but it was also big business, right? Like the political narratives where the right is big business, the left is big government, right? That was where you get sort of, the anti-corporation stuff. But then media leftist narratives were still popular, right? Because they were still fighting for something. They had an enemy. And so then we get to, you mentioned the fact that the left at this point, and we're kind of catching up to the modern day, the left went over the edge, right? Not just in their censorship and their morality. They went over the edge in two ways. One, they won by winning, right? And this is sort of my big sort of anti-usual normal right-wing stance. I don't think there's anything to conserve anymore. I think it is actually lost. But I also find that liberating. Two, by going over the edge, this is where we get stuck culture, right? Renewal and forms of progressivism, not necessarily the political kind, are from the youth, right? This is the most obviously seen through music. And so both of these traditions, academia destroyed everything, and now people are continuing to try to participate in academia. Culturally, we go over the edge. When you talk about, fat black chicks and Calvin Klein, it's because, fashion is sort of the most obvious part because there's nothing else to do, right? It's not even have to be as gross as it is or whatever, and virtue signaling. Like there's nothing else to do, right? And so they're going for a form of progressivism via rebellion, where really all they can do is not do the things that they did. And my whole thesis is recognizing the fact that the left has become the conservatives. They have become not right wing, right? But they have become the institutions, and the right via, starting with Frog Twitter, etc., have sort of tried to rebel against it, but like they literally can't, right? And I will tell
why
you,
can't they?
Well, because they can't have any narratives other than like the restoration to restore like a rightful place, right? Like the whole like belief in hierarchy assumes that the only narrative they can have, there's no enemy. The only thing they can have is restoration. And that doesn't work because the only restoration they can see is sort of this, conservatism. It's a return, right? There's nowhere else to go. And it certainly doesn't have any answers for the narratives that I'm talking about. Now, as far as, the sort of Nietzschean, eugenic, we're all science.
Yeah. What about that?
And,
right.
You have eugenics, right? And that's kind of it. But as far as cultural narratives go and like, grand scale, right? This is why Nietzsche worked, because it was individualistic, right? But people want to assert Western civilization. They want to assert dominance. I mean, I'll give you an example, man. Well, we can say that towards the end. This is in relation to the East Asian tweet. I don't know if you want to say that, or we can go there now.
Yeah, sure. No, go there. Go ahead. I was saying that the East Asians are becoming. It's becoming like a high class, or not high class, but classier coded to be East Asian. And people loved that tweet. I mean, I live in Pasadena, so it's very obvious here. But growing up, Asians were basically dry cleaner Americans. There was no clout to be had in being Asian at all, at least in my experience. There was no such thing as like rich Asians. They were just this kind of vague. It wasn't like good to be Asian. Yeah, it was like, okay, whatever. Yeah. You're just basically like Mexican, except you're a pussy, and like it wasn't like good. But now you really do see it starting to be like actually cool to be East Asian, not Indian, but like Korean, Chinese,
Right.
Japanese.
Right.
Those three, I just think they're so ascendant on the world stage, and they're so ascendant in America that now, like, really Asian shit is actually starting to be like high touch and like
Sure.
luxury-ish a little bit, you know. I mean, Japanese
Yeah.
has always been like that, of course, but now I mean just like in general, which I
Right.
think is cool. I'm down. Like I don't care. You know, I mean, fucking white
Nor do I.
people fucked it up. You know, so like if white people didn't want the crown and decided to, destroy
Okay,
themselves.
good. Yeah. Okay, so we're exactly on the same page then, right? So like, let's
Yeah.
once again like trace this narrative, okay, and then we'll kind of see where the conversation goes because then we're like at our point in history.
Yeah.
So
for
like
sure.
you have like Japan, you have a presence, right? Like they kind of get pulled over first because of the war, right? Where they were, with the insane economy that they produce. Well, let's ignore all that and just go straight up culture, right? So you get anime, you get awareness, you get general awareness of Japan. And it sort of stays like that. Like people, when it comes to China, it's all like sort of political. You know what I mean? It's foreign policy stuff. Like, people, millennials, I don't think grew up being like, oh, what they knowing shit about China or Korea. And so then we get to YouTube, right? And Asians, and I think that, and I mean, you don't have to like it, but I think that Asians have kind of, in their way, followed the cultural vacuum that blacks did, but then blacks kind of dropped the ball like really hard in the past 5 years. And so but then there's a space. But let's get back to YouTube, right? Like 2000s, 2010s. East Asians started having money, right? I mean, they're now in the suburbs, right? We also have immigrant populations like that actually have money from East Asia.
Yeah.
And so then American Asians find that they all of a sudden they have cultural holds in self media via YouTube, right? And so a lot, and there's not a huge, outside of Asian Americans, it's not a huge population, like a huge audience, but all of a sudden they start getting sort of solidarity, right? They have these they have these narratives that they find commonality in and they find expression from. And it's this new experience that hasn't been expressed via media. And so you have a lot of Asian channels get pretty big on YouTube. And so then as that increases, you get awareness from Americans, you get awareness inside of the media. And conveniently for everyone, sort of as the 90s take off, and especially in the 2000s, it's no longer cool to just like shit on foreign cultures, right? And so a lot of people are, millennials and Zoomers are pretty open, right? Zoomers, as most of the Zoomer waffen exist, they're all kind of used to being therapists to each other. And they're open, right? Like if you start talking about shit, they're going to listen to it. And so then it's like, oh, okay, so here's like these narratives, and I'll get to the really, really important part, which kind of spells the death for the West. But you get this exposure, right? You get curiosity, and then in the cultural void, you get things that are cool, right? You start getting, it starts on Netflix, right? Netflix had months where and I'm a cinephile, man. I know you are too. Like Korea sort of replaced Hong Kong, right? As far as the East Asian cinema go, like Korea in the 2000s was immaculate shit as far as cinema goes. And so then people started picking that up on Netflix. And then, chicks get into K-dramas. And then blah, blah, blah. You can sort of see where it goes from here, right? I don't need to expel that part. Then China's coming up. China might be too autistic to sort of translate culture. But I think, it'll come as the ladies doing a pretty good job of it. Like Chinese social media, the youth of China are fucking sick as far as using the internet goes. But here, so we get to the point where we're sort of in our current state. But what is it about Asia, right? Is not only is it remarkably aesthetic, right? Like everything, if you've ever been to any East Asian cities, man, like they're aesthetic as hell. Like they're gorgeous. And it's not just, Tokyo's clean because of demographics. There is an East Asian sensibility when it comes to design, when it comes, and it's born out of like the Tao, right? Like harmonies and all this other shit. But even their cigarettes, their cheapest cigarettes are pretty. And this, so then we're in the internet, and here's my big drop: is you have aesthetic populations, right, that have money, that are respectable, right? Most people, when people start bitching about shit, they're not bitching about Asian. And you have respectable populations that are obviously competent, but then they're aesthetic as hell, which is perfectly premiered onto the internet. But then you realize that these populations, especially China, were raised from birth to essentially be in competition with millions, if not billions of people. And when you consider that laid onto the internet, this is why they can survive. This is why Asians, they have the technological side, they have the social media, right? The idea, Western assertion of individualism cannot survive an algorithm. They're not used to, we're not used to the void, right? We're not used to not mattering. We're not used to being in competition with one another in the same way. And so we have these sort of ascendant populations in these ascendant countries that are perfectly aesthetic for the internet, and they're perfectly primed to survive this sort of like singular experience and expression that we're all dealing with. And so then we talk about white people dropping the ball. It's like, yo, we invented the internet. Yeah, but you're not doing shit with it.
Right. So where do you see where do you but how does this relate back to the notion of subversion?
Because you have to know the narratives to know what you're playing and to know what you're actually subverting, right?
Okay.
So if this is the world that we're living in, then we look at the right wing narrative, right? Whether it's art, whether it's politics, and by contrasting that with the way it's working outside of, is, oughts, and should be's and was, then all of a sudden we can see like, okay, like this is the actual playing field. It's not, it becomes much more than a dichotomy, right? The only sort of subversion the right has is not being the left at this point.
Right. I think that's true. And I think that from where I see it, what sort of has dawned on me recently, especially given like where the dissident right went, which was nowhere. It's like the whole thing's a fucking joke. It's a joke. And I think that that's like basically what Yarvin is saying. He's just having a very elaborate way of saying that the right wing in America is a joke. It's not real. There's nothing there. The only thing that is there is, as you're saying, not being the left. That is what the right is. The right is just not the left. And it has no ability to do anything, and it never will. I think that's what I've seen. It's not gonna. This train is not gonna stop. It's unstoppable. You can't stop this train. We're basically just waiting around for war, and then once we get war, everything will reset. It'll be glorious and horrible and all that stuff. But it's too far gone, man. It's like I think we're seeing this with Trump. Like I still love Trump, but none of this is real. Nothing happened. There's no stopping the train. The train to socialism is not going to stop. It's just going to happen. At least that's where I'm at.
No, I think so. I mean, the sort of the saddest part in my mind, and I think this is just part of the solution, and we can kind of dive into the subversion stuff as far as narratives go and all that, but the saddest part is sort of like the worship of the elites via the right, and realizing like, and this is the Yarvin thing, right? But you're not one, right? Like people, yeah. And I mean, and I
Yarvin thinks he is one. Yarvin talks constantly about
no, but that's the whole freaking thing, though, man. Like Yarvin's whole thing is basically like, hey, rich people, new quote unquote elite, pretend you're aristocrats. Right?
Yeah.
Like, that's what it is. He's like, it's literally, it's LARPers aristocrats until you kind of fake it to make it.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's true.
And people want right wing billionaires, but then if let's pretend a billionaire is like far right? You are scum. You know what I'm saying? I am here You are there. Why the fuck should I sponsor your book? Why the fuck should I sponsor your gallery? Unless you want to go with the Medici's, like, you know, you could probably get by with Elon if you like made it all about him, right? If you
Yeah,
want
but
to,
again, like this to me, everybody talks about this all the time, and this to me is not so much about like, it's not even that the right wing billionaires don't get it, right? Because they do get it. The right wing billionaires do get it. And you know what's crazy? I just learned this the other day. You know, like the whole donor class, right? We think of like the donor class. It's actually all right wing. It's really weird. Like if you like actually look at who the biggest donors are, for the most part, it's almost all right wing people. So it's actually not true that there's no right wing billionaires and they're not giving any money to anybody. Blah blah blah. I don't think that that's true. It's more
right then.
Well, not. I mean, there's far right, right? I mean, like, what is far right? What does far right even mean? I mean, what's so funny is, yeah, far right. Yet, if you are a far right billionaire, you're gonna still have a bunch of longhouse women running your organization. They're gonna call the shots. You know, you're not gonna do anything actually far right. I mean, yeah, there's probably a couple billionaires out there that like give money to Fuentes, right? But like, you know, that they have to do it in secret. They have to do it totally secretly, right?
Sure. And I mean, I'm not even trying to open up about, you know, why don't we have billionaire donors, right? The point kind of factually is like people are like, we're the elites, right? Like that's the far right thing, right? We're the elites, but then like you're not.
Yeah, no, they're not. Exactly. They're so not. And you know, whether there even is elites, I don't even know. I mean, I think there is to some degree, but
I call them the institutional class. Like at this point, I don't know as though there's actual elites as we used to have.
Yeah, well, I think that that's kind of an American thing that we just don't have aristocrats, and the aristocrats that we do have don't want to be aristocrats. You know, they want to be tech founders, you know, and actors.
No,
look at Hollywood. Hollywood's like half elites, like the daughters of elites and the sons of elites. It's like that's what they do. They don't want to. We're such a kulak nation that not working for us is such a like bad thing. You know, so our elites, as elite as they are, always have to like pretend to have jobs, or they have to actually have real jobs, like being an actor.
Right.
So
well, that's kind of what I talked about too, as far as the right goes, right? Like as far as any narratives of restoration, right? Like, you know, even the sort of elite narratives of Europe, you know, which, you know, get out, but it's just being part of something for a long time. Like that's it. That's literally it. And so, you know, even subverting is, you know, where I think we're kind of getting to it, right? To where, okay, if there aren't elites and if there is no elite class, right? If you're not it, then sort of what is the way forward? And this doesn't have to be, it can't just be politically, right? It's just to like survive the own shit. Like, you know, the masses and all of the Twitter addicts, right? Myself included, right? You know, we can doom scroll ourselves all the way to death, right? But the shit chugs on. And I think that this is why land is coming up, is that land. I don't know how familiar you are with him, but
but he is having a moment for sure. I'm a little familiar. I'm not that familiar with him. But yeah,
well, like even avoiding like, you know, like spurging out on things, right? The whole point is like if nothing else, you know, it's sort of embrace the internet, right? It's sort of the only way out is through to where, and he's been really on a sort of Gnostic Calvinism kind of thing right now. Yeah. But as far as the way forward goes, and this is the fun part, but it's also more difficult to talk about because when we talk about those narratives I talked about, what we talked about is this is what's been subverted. Right. And so then we get to the point where it's like, okay, well, what's next? And, you know, that is a much more interesting, but much more difficult conversation to have. Right. I mean, even the goals of the current counterculture via the right are okay. Like, and, you know, and I'm fully in support, right? Like, you know, remigration, like all this shit. But like I said, like I'm pulling way back. I don't actually, when in this hypothesis and these theories, I don't give a